and security will come to order. As we begin this markup, we are acutely aware that millions of our fellow Americans are in the path of a potentially deadly hurricane. We pray for their safety and hope that in this storm and its aftermath, we will witness the same resilience and support for fellow Americans that we saw a year ago in Texas, Puerto Rico, Florida, and other impacted areas. Committee is meeting today for consideration of H.R. 6735 to direct the Secretary of Homeland Security to establish a vulnerability disclosure policy for the Department of Homeland Security internet websites. H.R. 6740, the Border Tunnel Task Force Act. Senate Bill 1281, the Hack the Department of Homeland Security Act of 2017. H.R. 6620, the Protecting Critical Infrastructure Against Drones and Emerging Threats Act, and H.R. 6742, the Secure Border Communications Act. The chair announces that any requests for recorded votes may be rolled, and he may recess the committee at any point. Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. This week, we observed the 17th anniversary of the 9/11 terror attacks. While I was attending a memorial service at the Pentagon on Tuesday, many images from 9/11 returned to me. I remember the falling towers in New York, fires at the Pentagon, and I thought about the innocent lives that we lost, the pain we felt, and the uncertainty of what could happen next. It was the greatest attack in the history of our nation, targeting economic, military, and political symbols of power. But I also thought about the heroism of the passengers on United Flight 93 and the courage of our brave first responders. I drew strength from our ability to come together as we recover from this horrifying tragedy. In the aftermath of the attacks, we knew changes had to be made to keep our homeland safe. And as a result, we created the Department of Homeland Security and the relevant committees in Congress, including this committee. Since this could possibly be our last scheduled markup of the year, I want to express what an honor it's been to serve as your committee chairman. I strongly believe our homeland is safer today than it was on 9/11 because of what we have accomplished together. We've strengthened counterterrorism, information sharing, bolstered cybersecurity, enhanced aviation security, increased border security, and provided much-needed natural disaster relief. In this Congress alone, we passed 111 bills through our committee and 105 through the House. Because of this work ethic, Politico named this committee as the hardest working committee in Congress. The bills we passed included legislation to create a standalone operational organization to elevate the cybersecurity mission at DHS and the first ever comprehensive reauthorization of the department. These bills and many others passed with overwhelming bipartisan support, as it should be. I've always said that partisanship must stop at the water's edge. Our enemies do not check our party affiliation before carrying out an attack, and I believe this committee is led by example when it comes to putting national security above partisan politics. Today, we have an opportunity to build on that record by marking up 5 more important pieces of legislation. Today's bills will, number 1, protect our critical infrastructure against drones. Number 2, report security vulnerabilities of public websites. Number 3, establish a border tunnel task force. Number 4, equip CBP officers with better communication devices. And lastly, to identify IT weaknesses at DHS with a bug bounty pilot program. And Ranking Member Thompson, I want to thank you and your staff for all of your hard work throughout my chairmanship. I'm very grateful for your commitment to the safety and security of the American people, and I value and appreciate your friendship. Our partnership, I think, has set a high bar for other committees to follow. And I look forward to working with you and all the other members of this committee in the future. And with that, I now recognize the ranking member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I, too, have enjoyed working with you. We've done a lot of good things for the country. We've done things that I agree will keep us safe. I look forward to the future when we can continue on other projects of mutual interest. As you said today, this is probably the last committee markup that we'll have, and the work speaks for itself. So as we wrap this up, this week also marks the 17th anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attacks. Before that day, we could never have envisioned that passenger airplanes would be transformed into deadly missiles in the hands of terrorists who overtook cockpits and used their professional flight training to purposely crash the planes into the World Trade Center. The democratic measures under consideration today take to heart what the 9/11 Commission explained was a major factor in the attacks, a failure of imagination. The measures address the threats of an unconventional attack carried out by a drone or cyber intrusion. First, there is H.R. 6620, a measure introduced by the ranking member of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection Subcommittee, Mr. Richmond. It seeks to ensure that critical infrastructure owners and operators can report to DHS when they observe nefarious drone activity over their facilities. While drones are emerging as a critical tool for good in the homeland space, particularly with respect to border surveillance and disaster response, their proliferation does not come without risk. As we recently saw in Venezuela, a drone can be transformed into a deadly weapon of attack. The second Democratic bill was introduced by our Senate colleague, Senator Hassan. S.1281, the Hack DHS Act of 2017, seeks to harness talent outside of government to build up our defenses against cyber threats. It does so by authorizing a new program where DHS would provide a financial reward to those who legitimately come forward to report vulnerabilities on public-facing DHS website and applications to prevent exploitation by cyber terrorists, state actors, and criminal organizations. I look forward to the committee's timely action on these important measures. Before I yield back, Mr. Chairman, I'd note that I'm disappointed that the committee is not expected to have Secretary Nielsen before the committee this month. Members have a wide range of timely questions for the Secretary on a range of issues from immigration enforcement to election security and disaster response. I look forward to working with you to ensure that in the little time we have remaining this Congress, our members will be afforded the opportunity to pose those questions to the Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. Other members are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. By agreement between the chair and ranking member, the committee, by unanimous consent, shall use an amendment roster today.
Mr. Chairman.
Ranking member is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, reserving the right to object, and I will not object, would the chair please explain our agreement regarding the amendment roster? I yield to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman and all committee members for agreeing to the use of an amendment roster. We've agreed that the bills be open to amendment at any point, and that we shall take up amendments in the order listed on the roster. The chair will allow members to offer amendments listed on the roster out of order to the extent practicable and in a manner not prohibited by House or committee rules. Amendments not listed on the roster may be considered at the conclusion of consideration of the roster. Additionally, it's my understanding there is a bipartisan agreement on a number of the bills and amendments. Accordingly, the chair will be asking unanimous consent to consider those bills en bloc in the interest of time. The members with bills and amendments included in the en bloc will still be recognized for statement on the bill and amendment.
I thank the chair for this explanation and withdraw my reservation.
Thank the ranking member. I ask unanimous consent now that H.R. 6735, H.R. 6740, and Senate Bill 1281 be considered. Without objection, so ordered. The clerk shall designate the bills.
H.R. 6735, H.R. 6740, S.1281.
Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. Without objection, the respective subcommittees are discharged from consideration. The bills and amendments were circulated in advance, and printed copies were made available. I ask unanimous consent that the amendments pre-filed and listed on the roster be adopted. Without objection, so ordered. Are there any additional amendments to any of those bills? Hearing none, I ask unanimous consent that H.R. 6735, H.R. 6740, and Senate Bill 1281 as amended be ordered to be reported to the House with a favorable recommendation. Without objection, so ordered. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Staff is authorized to make any technical and conforming changes. Without objection, Mr. Ratcliffe, Mr. Langevin, and Mr. Vella may each be recognized for 5 minutes on their respective amendments. Does any member seek recognition? Mr. Ratcliffe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As an original co-sponsor of Leader McCarthy's bill, I have worked with my colleague from Rhode Island, Mr. Langevin, on an amendment that further strengthens the language around 3 of H.R. 635's most important measures, while also providing several technical edits to the bill. First, this amendment clarifies that the vulnerability disclosure policy required in H.R. 6735 applies to information systems throughout the department, as selected by the DHS Secretary. Vulnerabilities can exist in any electronic device or Internet-enabled technology, and it is important for the Secretary to take that into account. Second, this amendment ensures that the policy created by the Department to address security vulnerabilities will also clearly articulate the ways in which DHS will communicate with researchers and articulate that there is a process in place to mitigate or remediate these vulnerabilities. As the nation's leading civilian cybersecurity agency, it is of paramount importance that the Department lead from the front and be an example of the good cyber hygiene practices promoted by H.R. 6735. Finally, Mr. Chairman, this amendment clarifies the reports to Congress required by H.R. 6735. As we continue to improve on the authorities necessary for the Department to carry out its cybersecurity mission, both throughout the government and at DHS, it is critical that clear lines of oversight are established to ensure the successful implementation of H.R. 6735. I'd again like to thank my colleague, Mr. Langevin, for his good work on this issue and this amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Does any other member seek recognition? Mr. Langevin is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to commend Chairman Ratcliffe for his bipartisan support and the work we've done on this and other issues together on cyber, and appreciate his leadership as the chairman of the subcommittee. And Mr. Chairman, before I give my formal remarks, I just want to thank you for your leadership and that of the ranking member. I know that this is among the most bipartisan committees. I know we've, from time to time we hit a rough patch and there may be some disagreements, but your leadership has been exemplary, and that of the ranking member, and I thank the both of you for the partnership that you've had, how closely we work together on many issues, and cybersecurity in particular. But I'd like to begin by discussing H.R. 6735, the bill that I was happy to join the majority leader in introducing, and the amendment that Chairman Ratcliffe and I have offered to it to strengthen it. The use of vulnerability disclosure policies is widely regarded as a best practice. Such policies create a framework for individuals to responsibly disclose vulnerabilities in websites, apps, and other software and services. A vulnerability disclosure policy is an open hand of friendship to the hacker community, and it is important for all of my friends in this committee to understand that these security researchers are, for the most part, very willing to reciprocate that friendship. Now, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of bad actor hackers out there. That is not what I'm talking about today. These are the good guys. Last year, my friend, Congressman Will Hurd, and I traveled to DEF CON, the world's premier hacker conference. So I learned many things from my two hosts and now friends, Josh Corman and Bo Woods, but perhaps most important was that the majority of security researchers are not motivated by money. Some certainly are, and some are more eager for the glory, but others are looking for ways to get into systems because they like a challenge. And many are simply there just to make the Internet a better and a safer place in what it was originally intended to be. So I came back from DEF CON proud that the Department of Defense was making such strides in reaching out to this important community, and not just for the sake of building ties with the community. The Defense Department's efforts were to improve security. The Hack the Pentagon bug bounty program was wildly successful. 138 vulnerabilities found within just a 4-week period. For half the cost, the department has been paying to discover less than a tenth as many vulnerabilities. More importantly, the department also created a vulnerability disclosure policy that covered times when a bounty program wasn't actively running. After all, isn't it better to listen to someone who's trying to tell you about a security vulnerability than to cover your ears and just hope it goes away? Well, in May, the Defense Department reached the 5,000th vulnerability reported. 5,000th. It seems that there's a reason that having a vulnerability disclosure policy is a best practice in security circles. Yet coming back from DEF CON, I have to say I was disappointed to learn that the Department of Homeland Security did not have such a program. After all, DHS is the lead civilian agency for cybersecurity, and why should they fall behind the Pentagon or the General Services Administration? So I asked Secretary Nielsen this question in April. She promised to work with me to establish such a policy. I sent her a follow-up letter in July, and I have not heard anything back yet. Mr. Chairman, I ask that my letter to Secretary Nielsen that is dated July 27, 2018, be entered into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I do not believe that the Department needs any additional legislative authority to establish a vulnerability disclosure policy. Unfortunately, it appears that they won't do so unless Congress requires it of them, and that's why I support Mr. McCarthy's bill. So the amendment offered by myself and Mr. Radcliffe makes some important technical changes, like clarifying that any information system, not just websites, should be considered for inclusion in the program. And while I'm disappointed in the need for this legislation, I'm certainly proud of the bipartisan product that we produced. Which brings me to the other vulnerability disclosure bill, that's Senator Hassan's Hack DHS Act. Mr. Chairman, I'm of two minds on this bill. On the one hand, I've seen the success of Hack the Pentagon firsthand from my seat on the Armed Services Committee. Of course, it makes sense to try and duplicate that success in other departments and agencies. On the other hand, that firsthand knowledge means I know how hard the Defense Digital Services and Secretary Ash Carter's team had to work to make the program a success. After all, once a vulnerability is reported, you actually have to do something about it, either patch it or come up with some other mitigation. So building the processes to handle, report, triage them, and ensure remediation is a tall order. And while vulnerabilities are processed in a similar manner under a vanilla vulnerability disclosure program, one without compensation, the scale is different. A bug bounty will attract thousands and thousands of eyes, and you have to be prepared for that. All of which to say is to say that I do still have questions about the department's ability to implement a successful bug bounty program. But in closing, Mr. Chairman, like Senator Hassan, I'm tired of waiting. I have long said that I will support the department's efforts to move in this direction, and I still will. I don't think it will be easy, but I have confidence that they can succeed, and I will advocate for whatever resources they need to do so. My amendment to Senator Hassan's bill simply helps clarify that the vetting we need to do before paying a bounty is not a precondition for reporting a vulnerability. If you want to offer your assistance without being compensated, the door is open. And that, Mr. Chairman, is what I hope most we can take away from these two bills before us today. This committee recognizes the important contributions security researchers have, the far too often maligned hackers can be to protecting our nation. So with that, my door is always open to those trying to improve the security of the Internet, and I hope the Department will embrace this view, and I believe these bills will help steer it in that direction. I just want to thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and Chairman Radcliffe and Ranking Member Thompson. We also want to thank Maura Bergen for her assistance in crafting these amendments. I want to thank my own staff, Nick Isaacson and David Wagner as well. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I thank you for that amendment. I think it gave great correction to the Senate bill as well. Thank you. I now ask unanimous consent that H.R. 6620 and H.R. 6742 be considered. Without objection, so ordered. The clerk shall designate the bills.
H.R. 6620 and H.R. 6742.
Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. The bills were circulated in advance. Printed copies are available. Without objection, the respective subcommittees were discharged from consideration. No amendments were pre-filed. Does any member have any amendments to these bills? Hearing none, I ask unanimous consent that H.R. 6620 and H.R. 6742 be ordered to be reported to the House with a favorable recommendation. Without objection, so ordered. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. And without objection, Mr. Richmond, who's not here, would you like to speak?
Yes, I have a prepared statement for Mr. Richmond in support of his bill, and I'd just like to include it in the record.
Okay, without objection, so ordered. Does any other member wish to be recognized? Hearing none, this concludes the consideration of the bills before the committee today. Let me just close by saying that to date, we have passed now 116 Homeland Security bills out of committee, 83 Republican and 33 Democrat bills. 105 of them passed the House, including Dan Donovan's yesterday, the Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction bill that was on the floor just yesterday. 7 have become law. So we're still waiting on the Senate to act on nearly 90 bills. I did have a good call with Senator Johnson yesterday about moving some of the priority bills that we've done such a great job passing out of this committee, but I really wish the Senate would act. These are good governance bills. I would say probably 99% were unanimous and great bipartisan good governance bills. I also want to note that Ryan Propus's last markup, he'll be leaving at the end of the week to go over to TSA, and I want to thank him for all of his hard work drafting so many aviation bills before the committee as well. Thank you.
Yeah.
The ranking member is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I wholeheartedly support what you said. The House has done its work. The Senate absolutely is dragging its feet. Perhaps with new leadership, we can get more bills passed. I look forward to that next year. On another note, let me thank the Democratic staff. They have always worked well. We've gotten the work done, and I'm convinced that we set the high water mark for other committees and look forward to doing it going forward. So it's been a good ride on the McCall train, and we just look forward to doing great things in the future.
I thank them, Rick. It's not, the ride's not quite over yet, but it's getting close. And I want to thank the staff as well on both sides of the aisle for working so well to get the work of the people done to protect the American people. So with that, I now recognize a very distinguished gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to Rule 22, Clause 1 of the Rules of the House, I move that the committee authorize the chairman to offer such motions as may be necessary in the House to go to conference with the Senate on bills ordered reported by this committee today or other similar Senate bills.
Without objection, the motion is agreed to.
Mr. Chairman.
Ranking member is recognized.
Pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2L, I ask that members have 2 calendar days to file with the clerk of the committee supplemental, additional, or minority views on each of the bills ordered reported by the committee today.
Without objection, so ordered. There being no further business to transact, the committee now stands adjourned. I like that McCall train.